Let's start with the disclaimer first. Hello everyone. Today we will talk about project requirements, work breakdown structure, Scrum, Kanban, and finally JIRA. I decided to go with the following order because I think that it is good to have some kind of background, really necessary minimum background before go to the JIRA, because we need to know what is the project, what is the requirements, what is the work breakdown structure, where do we get these requirements from the customer, and what does the product owner do in the project, or why can't we as developers just sit, relax, write code, test it, and etc. But now we need to reprioritize things, or we need to do it in a certain way, and probably it will be split in different parts depending on the content. Let's see how it will go. It is just a small part of the product and project overview, I will say, but I hope that it will give you at least some hints to think about, to consider, and most important, to question. Please be prepared. It will be most controversial video probably, because it will have a lot of unpopular opinions to developers, to managers, to product owners, to everyone. I would beg you to think critically, to analyze the information, to consider it. If you have time, if you don't have time, please find it. But just go through the basics of the project, just to know the structure of the organization, to know basics, so you know what is your, if I can say so, area of the responsibility, so you know what is the others' areas of the responsibilities, and you will know whom you should ask and for what. Otherwise, it's quite easy to make a mistake and ask wrong person for things and get nothing, be frustrated, and eventually burn out. First of all, it will be probably a long video, at least longer than 5 minutes, I hope. So please take some paper to take notes. If you want, you can grab your favorite beverage. If you want to get some fun, you can play some music on the background, but please make it a bit lower so you can hear me. Let's get started. So, jumping to the project. According to the project management, I will also attach probably a link to some documents or websites. But what is the project? When we are talking about project, like real project, we are not talking about project that we are creating in Visual Studio or any other integrated development environment. We are talking about something what we are doing. So we are writing a code to run an application, to run a service, to run a code to collect data from sensors and present to a user. We are writing a code to display pictures on the dashboards or something else. We are doing a bunch of the things. And the project itself, it is basically this set of tasks to get, let's say, our wishes real. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not successful. Sometimes it is with side effects, sometimes it is without side effects. Project might have a great idea, project might have bad idea. Now you could probably raise the question, and why shall we know what is the project, why it is needed, and etc. Because when we are working in a company, we are working with one or with different projects. If we are self-employed and we are working on something fun, that's also a project. So almost everything what we are doing can be considered as a project. Why we are talking about the project here first? Because project gives us an idea what should be done. Probably it will give us some economics or finances to be able to pay for our work. And most importantly, requirements. So let's go to the requirements. I will send the link to this page. It is Project Management Institute. They have a really good document. I think that it is possible to find a PDF document for the project management. I would recommend to read it. So according to the requirements management, requirements will help you to understand, to analyze the amount of work, the feasibility of the work, and what is needed, what is not needed. Please read this page. It might be interesting for you. Based on the requirements, you are planning your work. I wanted to show you this picture because it is illustrating the problem nowadays. Too many people, too many elements are involved in the project. All of them might have different understanding, different views, of course, different ideas and wishes. Let's look at this picture in a different way, and I will open another picture. And it is work breakdown structure. I took it from the page, I think it is projectmanager.com. I would say that it is kind of a skeleton of this picture that we have. In the beginning, every project should have its own work breakdown structure to be able to analyze important milestones, the amount of work needed, the requirements, people who is going to do this project, how to control it. It is called here close out. It is how to end the project. And you can see that it has different stages. So initiation, planning, execution, control, and close out. Planning, execution, and control are not sequential, but it is iterative process. So it goes planning, execution, control, and right after it again, the controlling the planning, how goes it according to the control of the execution, and then tuning execution based on the planning, change it or not. I will say that this is a skeleton of this process. Well, if something is changing during the project, it should be communicated in all levels. But as usual, we have a problem with it because too many people means less responsibility. Less responsibility, more flexibility, more relaxed way, and then we have some problems as usual. And we ended up usually here on some of these pictures. So work breakdown structure. It is the way how to define stages or milestones or key moments of the project, maybe in timeline or maybe in the execution line. We can work on the project in different ways. When we're talking about the project, we might have kind of sequential execution, like a building construction, which has relatively small chance that we would need to reconsider something. We have software development, which has quite often too many changes. And usually, I would say that the project itself might be considered into two major probably methodology, how to execute it. One of them, which is called waterfall, and it means that we have these stages, for example, idea, proposal, planning, design, development, testing, deploy. Usually it means that in the stage of the development, there is a really small chance that we will go backwards to the design and planning, but we should go forward to the testing and deploying. And sometimes, for example, you just joined a team in a new project or in a new company. Quite often it happens that you just have a bunch of the tasks to do. For example, onboarding, when you need to set up a laptop, get an access to everything and etc. And there is no real work so far, or maybe you need to learn first of the environment. So then you might apply waterfall methodology when you just get a bunch of the tasks and then depending on the state, you're just doing them. But then you can switch to the agile. And under agile, it means that you are working on the task depending on their priority from the customer perspective. And periodically, you are checking with the customer, for example, how urgent is it. Then you reprioritize things and then you continue your work. We will go through it in a few minutes. In the waterfall, we do it quite often sequentially. For example, when you are wearing on your clothes, you have your own order and you're just pulling on socks, then you take pants, for example, and etc. In the agile approach, it is kind of when kids are asking you, for example, what to wear and where is the jacket and etc. And then you need to check first the weather, then you need to check what was in the washing machine, what is dry enough, what is dirty enough, and etc. And then based on this, you are suggesting clothes to kids, for example. It's a quite bad example, but that comes to my mind. If we're talking about the agile, quite often it means that you have a group of people and you define the time scope or time window, 2-3 weeks. Your team takes 10-15 work items to work on within these 2 weeks. In the end of the 2 weeks, or so-called sprint, you show to a customer or representative of a customer the work done, and also you checked what is left, and then leftovers will be transferred to the next sprint, and then you planning your work based on updates from the customer. What is the Agile and what is Scrum? According to the Atlassian.com, Agile methodology is a project management approach that involves breaking the project into phases and emphasizes continuous collaboration and improvement. Teams follow a cycle of planning, executing, and evaluating. The Scrum is an agile project management framework that helps teams structure and manage their work through a set of values, principles, and practices. It means that if we apply agile methodology, we are not applying waterfall because they are self-exclusive. Let's talk about the ideal world. In the work breakdown structure, we will focus on the planning, execution, and control. And if we take a look at the agile or Scrum, what we can see here that we have planning. So every sprint will starts usually with planning. What work items we will take into the sprint. Then we have execution, and then we have two types of the controls. I would say mini control or micro control when we have daily Scrum meetings. On daily Scrum meetings, usually it is every working day. At some time, team just collected and kind of informing each other what is the status of the work. Usually, the Scrum meeting contains 3 important bullets. What I have done yesterday, what I'm planning to do today, and third one, what is the problem or obstacles that I have. And then we have, I would say, macro control. It is sprint review, when we collecting together and then we review what has been done and what is left for the next sprint. Do we have the work items that we can present to a customer? Unpopular opinion or controversial information. Quite often we do major mistake. I do it a lot. On the Scrum meetings, we are saying what we would like to hear, but not the real problem. For example, I took a task which is quite difficult for me, really tough, but I'm a strong person, I can do that. So on the daily meeting, I'm saying, I'm working on this story, I have some problems, but I will finish it. And then when someone will ask you, usually one of 2 questions. The first one, do you believe that you will finish it during this sprint? Or would you like to have any help? The answer will be something like, yeah, sure, I will probably finish it today or tomorrow. And on the question about the help, usually it means, I need to check one thing more. And then, the most ugly answer on daily would be something like, I was working on that item yesterday and I need to finish up some stuff, so I will probably continue to work on it today or something like that. That's horrible. That's pathetic, because instead of the getting kind of control of the current state, what is left, what is needed to be done, we are reporting kind of our feelings. Yeah, I was doing something and probably will continue working on something. Please, I'm really begging you, as developers, as an IT, as any other colleagues. On the Scrum meetings, when we are talking about kind of local control of the situation, we should report what is done and what is not done, and is there any help needed? Because we are working as a team. We are aiming for one or several goals, and we want to make work done. It is not a competition between 2 or 3 sportsmen. It is not a competition between 2 or 3 concurrent companies. We are working in the same group. So instead of saying something like, yeah, I will probably work on it, and then wait for critical moment, it is important to say that I'm struggling with this. I will probably try to fix it within some time. Otherwise, I will ask for help. There is nothing bad to ask for help. It is important to learn and to make things done. Sorry for getting on the discussions here. We have 2 types of the controls. It is a local control or mini control on daily, and then we have macro control in end of the sprint. I just realized that I have too much to say about the agile, about the scrum, about the sprints, about the planning itself. And probably that video will be 18 plus and probably will damage too many minds. Please let me know in the comments if you would like to have kind of spicy statements to argue about. I will try to make this video then. And talking about the Agile Scrum framework, in quite big companies, it is involved into something called SAFe or Scalable Agile Framework. It means that we have a company which has epic owners and enterprise architect who are basically planning the whole project, how does it look, how it should go, and etc. Then it is split into some units and move it to next stage. It is product management, system architect, and business owners. So let's assume that we decided that our service is big enough, and we will talk also about some hardwares. Our abstract company now works not only for the software, but also for the hardware. So we will have epic owners, which will be responsible for the services, for the software part, and for the hardware part. And probably one person who will be responsible for the communication between 2 of them. Otherwise, we will have this responsibility between them. So we will have 3 epic owners, hardware, software, and hardware software, which is kind of the communication part. And then enterprise architect. The one will be responsible for the software, which will plan how to work with it. We will have enterprise architect for the hardware, to know, for example, which components to use and etc. And one will be responsible probably to communicate between these 2 architects. And then we go to the 2 business at least, or maybe even 3 business. The first one related to the hardware, second one related to the software, and third one for the communication, for testing, and etc. Oh yeah, by the way, we forgot about the testing and verification. We have this responsibility, people, and then we will have bunch of the teams working on different items in these services. So here we will have product owners. And what does it mean? Usually that we have something really big, or let's call it here epic owner, enterprise architect, who is saying we are working on the services to gather information from sensors, from different type of sensors. Then we have business owner, which is responsible for this service. Then this business owner works together with product manager, who is setting kind of the planning, requirements, timeline, finances related to the service for the software part. And then product management or product manager saying, for this service, we will allocate 3 teams. And to be able to deliver this product, we will have 3 product owners who will be responsible to contact with the customers and plan the work according to requirements and design provided by system architect. And then product owner will help teams to plan their work, to plan the stories or work items to work on, and be representative of the team towards the client. So basically, product owner is talking who is the client and returns back to the team in saying, hey, customer would like to have this. And then teams are saying, we're able to do 3 items and 4th one is impossible to do. Then product owner should technically go to the client and say that we are working on the first 3 points that you are saying, but 4th one is not possible to do due to blah, 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 blah. And then team does their job done. Then team works on the items, prioritized by product owner and team together. So it is important for the team to stay sometimes against the product owner and say that no, we are going by this way due to this situation or due to this specification. And if something is violating the requirements, but customer would like to have it, then product owner should bring it up to the chain, to product manager and business owner and epic owner and organization itself or to a customer and fix this problem and either have a deviation and also changes in the project itself or just removing this feature. It is ideally working on the paper in a theory. In the reality, as you can see here, we have so many elements in the chain which might affect on the project. And if one of the elements in the chain works badly, then the whole project might be ruined, I would say. It reminds me of a quote, a chain is no stronger than its weakest link. And I would say that quite often it is true, because if product owner, for example, as a key element will work quite badly, then the whole team will suffer because everything in the project goes quite strange. Or product owner will not react on the client or will work quite badly with the client or customer. If product manager or system architect does their job quite badly, then we will suffer. So there are too many elements which goes wrong. If you hear that my tone is changed, it's because I told too much but then cut it on the editing, so to not get in jail. No. If I say something wrong, that's my personal opinion. Please don't listen to me. It's not serious. Just please feel free to disagree with me. That's absolutely fine. It's just opinion about the situation. Quite often people are working really good. It is my personal opinion. Please feel free to disagree with some of my statements. Think critically, analyze what I said or analyze your work and work structure. I know there are quite big amount of people who working as hell, I would say. They're working not 100%, but 150%, 200%. They are burning out themselves inside, but they are making things done. I know them. And yes, sometimes you could see people who don't care about what is happening. Okay, with this pane, the JIRA board, usually you are landing somewhere here. I call it the project, your exciting project, to kind of motivate you. And also when we will create stories, they will have abbreviation of YEP. And then can say that we are working on your exciting project. YEP. Usually you will see something similar to this page with small customization. But quite often you will see something similar to it. What do we have here? We have work. Usually here you get kind of your last activities or maybe stories that you were working on it and etc. In projects, usually you have here 1, 2 or many projects. So it is basically this project as a set of stories, issues and sprints created on JIRA. Quite often you will work on one of the projects, but you might jump between 2, 3, 4 projects. One project might have multiple teams, but also one team might have 2 or 3 projects. One for the development, one for the maintaining, and etc. For example, IT support team or DevOps team who is helping to create a pipeline or to maintain the infrastructure, they might have two projects. First one to create a new things and second one to support something. Then we might have filters. Filters helping you to navigate between issues created in JIRA. We will talk about it a little bit later. Dashboard is kind of place to create the widgets to keep track of work done and your productivity. Usually it is good tool for the Scrum Masters or product owners to keep track of the progress. Teams, if you're working in one or multiple teams, you will have it here. And the most important button here, create. When you click on create, you create usually an epic, task, story, and etc. depending on your settings. Then what will be useful for you also, search. If you need to search something across the Confluence page or maybe items. We have here timeline. The timeline is part of the, if I can say so, this planning, execution, and control stages in the project. Because in your project, you might have milestones, so you can plan the amount of work on these dates. Usually it helps to represent the amount of work items for the client and also discuss what should be done first, what should be done afterwards, and etc. Quite often, product owner is setting up the timeline because product owner is communicating with customer. Product owner knows the priority of stories and epics. Then we go to the backlog. The backlog contains the list of work items to work on. And usually when we have an idea, we feel that something should be done, and we create a story or we create a task just to not forget about it, we should put it on the backlog. I observe it. The good strategy is to create an issue and put it on the backlog and write immediately in the description at least some key elements of the story, why it should be done and what should be done. And then quite often the product owner together with Scrum Master and the development team are doing or performing backlog refinement. When they go through the stories in the backlog, checking there together with the timeline about the priority, and then if it is needed to be merged with another story in case of duplicating, then they are merging or they are deleting or they are rejecting. If you as a developer find a problem that should be fixed soon, but there is no story for it, just create it and put it on the backlog. And we will work on the planning a little bit later, of course. Then we have board. Board usually contains 3 or 4 columns. It is to do, in progress, in review, and then done. The difference between open and to do columns. The story is in to do column. Already refined, usually split it into subtask and ready to start work on it. If you have story in open column, usually it means that something is not ready yet, or maybe something is unclear so far before starting it. It is just an abstract example, sorry for bad examples, but what I mean. Assume that your team is quite smart, but you ended up in the situation that you need to analyze algorithm first, let's say during 2-3 days. It is just a relatively small task, but you have 2 algorithms. They are quite competitive. So you need to analyze and choose which one we should implement. The implementation is quite simple. You just need to analyze and choose one of them. So then you have a story to do, and then you have open story to implement an algorithm. But this algorithm will be depending on the story one. So then you have it open, and once you finish story in progress, then in review, and then it is done, then you can analyze this story. And once you analyzed it, then you can move it to do. I would recommend just go to the Scrum Master or product owner who was working on this company some period of time and ask about these boards in the company, because different companies, different styles. Some companies use epics and stories, some companies use stories and subtasks to divide the work and etc. Then I was thinking about covering the thing, so-called requirements. I have observed it in one of the companies, and I would say that it sounds quite cool. They had a separate project which is called something like requirements for something. They had here different types of issues. They called it something like open, confirmed with customer, deviated, and something similar. And then in the list, they just created a bunch of the requirements so they can link it to stories. And for example, in one of the requirements, let's call it like we are talking about services, right? So one of the requirements might be, we are talking about not real requirement. A client can read data from sensors. It is kind of requirements number one. And here, of course, you can add more information if needed. And if it is really needed, you can add a description here. For example, let's say that it is possible to read data from sensors in the list, and we will write here appendix 1. It is just an abstraction, but the idea. So, and then in your exciting project, you create an epic, and in the epic you write something like read data from sensors, and then you link it to relates to, for example, or you might have more options here, and you link it to the requirements. So then in your timeline you have epic, and then in this epic it is linked to requirements. And it was really cool because they had a full control in JIRA for the requirements, and they have kind of coverage of the requirements by epics. If you are product owner or scrum master, think about this approach. You can implement it in a different way, of course, but the idea itself was really cool. Since we created that epic, usually epic means some big functionality, and quite often in the epics, so if we open it and if we look at the work breakdown structure, let's look at this picture. You have execution and they lay foundation, interior work, exterior work. So in terms of the JIRA, lay foundation and interior work, exterior work would be epics because it is something big. And then you have a little bit smaller but still big things to do. It is excavate and pour. In our case, in our excited project that we are doing, our epic is to read data from sensors, for example. As you know, there is no functionality implemented yet, but it is just covering one of the requirements, and it is something big. Inside this epic, we can split it into stories. It is kind of group of work that we're planning to work on. Can create add child issue. Here we can split our epic into several steps or plan our work. I heard it from one of the product owners, and I must say I'm really grateful to work with that person. I learned many things from that product owner. I heard something similar too. I'm trying to phrase it, but epics is some big functionality in the project. Stories is part of the epics, and the aim of story is to solve a problem or functionality related to this epic. So in our case, read data from sensors. Let's think about it because I haven't planned it yet, so it is real-time action, right? It's read data from sensors. In my mind, I see two main things. The first one is to create an... Let me think a little bit about it. So we have sensors. In our case, it is imaginary sensors, of course. But if we are talking about something real, usually it means that we have some code running, reading data from sensors, and then reporting it back to the main service or main application. We need to define an interface. So let's call it define an interface for data. And in JIRA, there are possibilities to set up JIRA with different ways. So we have a define an interface for data, and then we might create two child issues. The first one will be define an interface in draw.io that we have done already. Then we might have define an interface. Let me write it here. Duplicate an interface in plant UML. And then the third one, do we need the third one? That's a good point. We can think about it. If you open one of the subtasks, you will see that we have a story. So there is a parent story, and then we have an epic usually. So if we go to the one of the subtask, we can see parent and epic. If we are talking about stories and epics, usually stories. I apologize for the mismatch of the video because I am recording again part of the video due to wrong information that I have said, and I would like to fix it. I was telling the difference between epic, stories, task, subtask, and when shall we use one or another. And I have found a page on JIRA which might help you to clarify what is happening. So usually we have epic as part of the big functionality. When we are talking about something really big, then we create an epic. Then epic might contain several stories or tasks. And here we have some information about it. So, for example, story, track functionality, or features expressed as user goals. And we can interpret it in the different ways. We are trying to think in a way that story requires some functionality needed, or maybe feature to implement. And it is some functionality with some complexity, if I can say so, related to a product. Then we have task. Under task, it's stated that it is track small distinct pieces of work. So, for example, if we have a functionality related to improvements, let's say we want to introduce automatic testing for our project, or we would like to increase the test coverage, then task will be more suitable. And then one thing that I would like to also cover, it is the bug. So, for example, assume that we have released a release candidate version to a customer or to stakeholders so they can run it the first time, or maybe a beta version, I would say even. Imagine that it is a beta version. All bugs collected or reported from client, customer, stakeholders, they will have a bug type, most likely. And then usually when we are planning amount of work with product owner and scrum master, there is a quite big chance that some amount of bugs will be taken as the first priority. There is different strategies and way how to plan the work for the sprints and what it should be. Some people are saying something like 20-30% should be bug related, then 20-30% related to the development, and 20-30% related for the new features, for example, or tests, or maybe documentation or verification, but usually it doesn't work like that, and it is purely improvisation. It's a bit different part. So we have epic, and epic can include story or a task. And then story or task might have subtask. And it is depending on team and company. Sometimes people can create story and work on it within couple days or 3 days, for example, and just update the comments with the current status if needed. But sometimes people can create subtask within a story to keep track on the micro level, if I can say so. Assume that we are talking about story to create a Git repository. To keep track of all small details needed, I would create a subtask to create a Git repository to manage access for that repository, probably to set up the pipeline, just to have it set it up correctly. So that will be a small subtask to keep track of the work. The way how to split work is totally depends on the team, a company, and Scrum Master, of course. Correct hierarchy would be epic. Then we have story 1, story 2, task 1, task 2, and then, for example, in task 1 we might have subtask 1.1. Here we might have subtask 1.1. I just wanted to kind of update the description. We have an epic, Then we have story 1. Within story, we might have subtask. Then we have story 2 as an example. Then we have task. So we have story and task. And within task, we might have also subtask. In most cases, it is depending on the configuration of JIRA within a company. Talking about the hierarchy, I also wanted to show you one of the things. It is called workflow. Please check it out because in some companies flow might be quite strange. Under workflow, it means how can you change the status of tickets. It is quite important if you have a specific workflow for the bugs, for example. First of all, if I say a ticket, usually it means an issue. So ticket is equal to issue in my cases of understanding. So we have JIRA ticket, we have JIRA issue. It is the same, it is kind of name of entity. And then we have type of this issue, and it is epic, story, task, subtask, and separately bug. It is important because different types might have different workflows. For example, if we have epics, stories, or task, we might have some similar workflow like this. So it means that we can create a JIRA item, epic, story, task, subtask, and it will have status to do. Then we can move it to any of these statuses. We can also change this workflow. Sometimes you have to do, then it should go to open, and then from open you go to in progress, then in review, and only then in done. So it is one of the ways which might be set up by your organization. The specific workflow for the bug. If a client or a customer encountered an issue that we need to fix, they creating specific type of an issue, which is called the bug, and then it gets a status open. Then let's call it like that. Specifically educated person looks at the bug and then analyzes it. And once it grabs or starts to analyze this bug, it moves the status to bug analysis. From that point, it can be moved to rejected. For example, dear customer, next time when you're trying to update a software and it doesn't work, make sure that your laptop is powered on. Or it can be moved, as you can see here, to normal case in progress. Sometimes it might be moved to resolve it. For example, we have found a duplication of the bug, so that bug is already solved. This one is also resolved as well. In most cases, it goes to the progress. Then developers are working hard to fix a problem. Once it is done, they do kind of intermediate status done, and then it should go to the verification status. And usually it means that an external forces, for example, are verifying the solution, that the bug is solved. And then if it is solved, then it is moved to resolve it. From any of these steps, it might be moved to rejected. And at some points, it might go to resolve it. So it is also important when you are working with JIRA stories and items to pay attention on the workflow, because sometimes product managers, product owners, they are quite carefully working with the workflow. So that's one of the things that I wanted to cover in JIRA, and it is workflow of items. So now we can jump to the story point estimate and estimations, why it is needed. What is the purpose of the estimation? To be able to plan our work for 2-3 weeks, or let's call it a sprint, to be able to predict our output within this period of time. So for example, when we go to a restaurant or we go to a cafe, usually we have this estimation time, how many minutes shall we wait for our order, let's say. The same with software development quite often. A customer, client, stakeholders, they want to receive a feature usually as fast as possible. So we might have an abstract stakeholder which is waiting for define an interface for data. And to be able to answer on the question, when shall we expect this feature to be done, we need to estimate amount of work. We need to estimate the complexity of this feature. Not like how fast can I do that, but the amount of work needed. So, for example, it's something similar to a distance from one point to another. So to be able to guess amount of time needed to reach a place from point A to point B, it is great to know the distance. It is a tricky part of the estimation because it is basically our best guess. Our goal here is to try to understand the task, what should be done, and then try to guess the complexity of this task. We know our capabilities, we know our abilities, and based on our information about ourselves, we can judge how difficult for us to implement this task. And then based on our knowledge and based on our calculations, we can estimate how long will it take to perform such a story or such a task. And of course, this data will be not precise, definitely, because we cannot foresee sometimes problems or hidden stones under the water. So it could be just a short walk on the park, I would say sometimes, but sometimes it might be creating a space elevator to another planet when we need to calculate so many trajectories and possibilities that sometimes it's even impossible to do. But the goal is to estimate the complexity of the story and or split it into several stories based on the context and scope to be able to estimate it better, and then do kind of retrospective view backwards and see what kind of stories we have performed and how hard was it to perform them. So we can approximate the complexity of the stories for the future, if I can say so. Looking at the past and how hard was some kind of stories for us, we're trying to predict the complexity of the stories in the future, to be able to answer to stakeholders, to clients, to investors, how much work needed to achieve specific goal or to get some functionality. In other words, we kind of trying to say to a customer that their order will be done within hours, days, months, years, centuries. How to estimate the story point or task to work on. You might think about working hours and story points. The main difference between working hours and story points is that working hours is something real. So, for example, we have a sub-story, define an interface in Draw.io. Assume that we have a group of people and we need to plan or estimate the amount of work for this. Some developers might say, yeah, I will define an interface within a couple hours, so you can write 4 working hours. But then we have some developers who are not comfortable, maybe less experienced, that's absolutely fine. They can say, oh, I will need at least 2 days to define an interface because I need to gather information from different people first, maybe discuss it with architect. The working hours for me will be 2 days. We are estimating the speed of execution. But with story points, we kind of estimate the complexity of work. Under complexity, we mean how difficult to define an interface. And then we can say that to define an interface, it will take maybe 2-3 story points. Assume that we all are living in this abstract building and it is our workplace. So when we're talking about working hours, we will need to estimate how long it will take for us to reach from point A to point B. So some of you might use cars and it will take for you 20 minutes. Some of you might go by walk and it will take, let's say, 2 hours. Some of you might take a bicycle and it will take for you up to 1 hour, for example. And it means that we all will use different means how to reach that place. And it means that we will have all different estimations. But if we will talk about the distance, for example, can you visually guess how far is the workplace? Then we will try to estimate kind of the same value. So, for example, all of us will look at the workplace and will say 20 kilometers, for example. And we will talk about something common. The same with distance too. Quite commonly, people are using story points, and usually the first half year of starting a project, we estimate the complexity based on our experience or our mood and wishes, and we can estimate it less. Or if we are more pessimistic, I would say, then we can estimate more story points that it is actually is. And then these values are not trustworthy. But the most important is for Scrum Masters probably and for the developers is to observe and then re-estimate the story points of work done. Because after some period of time, you will find the kind of trend that specific amount of work, which is called distance 1, takes for you around 2-3 story points. And if it is something bigger, then you will need distance 2 and it is 5-8 story points. So then you will feel how many story points can you personally perform during the sprint, or how many story points as a team you can perform during the sprint. And then we come to management estimation. The problem with story points for you as a team, if we are talking about agile, is to take amount of work that you can done during the sprint. And if you have leftovers, then you will put it in the next sprint, of course, and you will take less tasks to do. But for some managers who are looking at statistics and not at the distance, but for the numbers, people might have management estimations. And it means something like, there is the distance 1, but to look better, for this sprint, it will be distance 2. Or we have distance 2, we have 8 story points, but we will split the story into 2 parts, and we will have 3 story points in the first sprint and 5 story points on the next sprint. For these nice statistics for the management level that our team is performing fine. And then it is a bit shaky, because many developers don't like to split tasks into 3, into 4, into 5 elements. They would like to work on one task and report how is the status. But from the management perspective, what they see that there is, let me open it here on the timeline. We have an epic during the 3 weeks, for example. And it's already past half of the month and no work done. What is happening? It's because the hard complexity, but we want to see the results. We want to see that this epic is done already. And then we come up with management estimation, when we are creating sometimes falsely needed stories just to make sure that we have some performance on graphics. And unfortunately, it is part of the reality that sometimes managers or some other people in this chain of safe, they would like to see your performance and they would like to see some story points done during the sprint. And you know what is happening quite often? That you are somewhere here close to the end, but you are waiting for the final review, or you are waiting for impediments, you are waiting for dependencies needed before it will be merged. And you have, for example, 3 or 4 stories here in the review state waiting for something. And people are pushing you with phrases, yeah, but you know, we need to close story points within this sprint. And it is quite bad. Please take it as a pinch of salt. As I said before, it is controversial video, so I am waiting for a comment section. As you may notice, we can write here any number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the question is how to estimate it. And here I would say there is an approach which is quite widely used, and it is use the Fibonacci sequence to estimate the story points. Probably you know these Fibonacci numbers. So it means, for example, estimation of story points up to 8 included can be done within one sprint as a one story. If you estimate the complexity of the story as 13 and more, it means that this story should be splitted into 2. And when you estimate the complexity of the stories, it is a bit easier to go between 5 and 8. Because you might say, I will estimate it as 6, and then it is close to 5, but not to the 8. There is one thing which is called the Scrum poker. The idea of a Scrum poker is that every team member in a team, when they are estimating the complexity of the story, they took a card and then show it to each other. And then there is a calculation to get the average number of the complexity. And then this number will be compared to the Fibonacci sequence. That's quite useful on the paper. The most problematic part is that quite often on the sprint planning, 2 or 3 people within the group are talking and everyone else is just silent. And in that case, you have wrong estimations, because quite often you have one, can I say, with all due respect, talkative person that's saying, oh, this story is quite easy. And then everyone got false feeling that this story is easy. Or we have one person who is quite pessimistic and said that this story will require a lot of work. And then everyone will have this false feeling that that story is complicated, maybe more complicated than they were imagined. Not every time planning poker is used. Sometimes people are discussing complexity, and it is good if everyone is involved. It is not needed to personally, interrogate everyone about the feelings behind the story. Why did you decide to use number 9 here? But just to ask a number. Now we can go to sprints, I guess. Under sprints, we are talking about the period of time. Usually it is 2-3 weeks. The reason of 2-3 weeks, because on the beginning of sprint, usually you have a sprint planning, and then you have sprint retrospective, sprint review, and also you might have backlog refinement within the sprint. And usually it means that you have 5 working days and 2 or 3 of them are occupied by meetings, so you don't have too much time work on the actual items. 2 or 3 week sprint, usually. Sprints are used in Agile or Scrum. Quite often you have several teams working in the same sprints, and then in the end of the sprints you have a common meetings where you're presenting the results and etc. But it is related to Agile and Scrum, but I'm using the Kanban board. And Kanban works in a little bit different way. We don't have sprints. We have basically a board with list of stories to work on. And it means that we go to board and we just need to create here, firstly, on the planning, list of items to work on, and then move all of them to done. That's an idea. We don't have sprints. We just create work items to work on, and then we make it finish. That's basically it. Talking about the sprints and estimations, now it is time to discuss one thing which is called dependencies. So, for example, in our task related to the define an interface for data, we have 2 child issues. The one is define an interface, and second one is duplicate an interface. And based on the title, I apologize for lack of the description here. We can write it later when we will probably plan our work. But here we can link issue, and you can see here is blocked by or blocks. And here we can specify define an interface in row IO and link it. So now if we go back to this issue number 6, you will see that it automatically creates a link to blocks. And it is needed in the case if you are filtering stories in the backlog, which are open to do. So you can add a filter that, for example, there is no blockers. Or if one of your colleagues opened the board and then, oh, I would like to grab this story to work on, or I would like to move this story here. Then you can open the board and see, wait a second, I have one story missing, for example, or I have one which is blocked. So it helps your team members to see what is blocked by and why. So that please use it actively. If you feel that something is blocking you, then create a story and make it, because during the backlog refinement, quite often you go through the issues and see, oh, I have this one blocked by something, and then you go there and maybe you need to escalate a problem to higher level and etc. So please use actively dependencies and linked issues if needed. Talking about the dependencies, you might see two things. The first one, it is a flag and also a label. And I would say these two options, add flag and add label, is totally depending on the company. Sometimes they are using one of them, sometimes use both of them, or you can discuss maybe you will use it within a team. For example, one of the Scrum Masters, which I had a honor to work with, the Scrum Master was using label to indicate case of ending a sprint when we feel that we have, for example, here 30 stories on board and they are in the review. The Scrum Master could mark as a flag stories which will be prolonged to the next sprint, because sometimes you might wait for the review 1 hour and make it done. But sometimes you might get a review and then review and then review, and then it will be for the next sprint for 3-4 days more. And in that case, the Scrum Master just flagged it. It is for the comfort. It is totally depending on a team and a company and the culture. The nice thing here is issues. So issues contains all stories, epics, subtasks, tasks created in this project. And you can sort them. For example, you want to see only epic or you want to see only task. It helps to search for some of the stories to get a comment from, because sometimes you might refer to a comment in a story which was closed 2-3 months ago. It helps you just to find an issue. Or you might have multiple open issues and then you would like to search in them one of the issues that someone has created or it's open and etc. And you are using here some filters. But one of the coolest things that JIRA has, it is JQL, or I would call it JIRA query language. It is quite similar to SQL. I think it is sequential query language. Yeah, structured query language. I apologize. Structured query language. It is quite similar, but it helps so much us if we want to create a custom filter for your team to get something and etc. How does it work? You are setting here a list of the conditions that you will need to fulfill, and then how you would like to display these issues, in which order, I would say. So for example, you have a project, then you write here, or you want to have project which equal to, and then it can suggest you this project. And if you want, you can surround it by quotes. Then if you want, you can add new condition here, and then you have fields to select. The description and then is not and then empty. And then you get a list of the items with still empty description, but maybe unsaved changes. Yeah, right. I apologize. So here you could see that I got all issues right now with empty description because I constructed it in the wrong way. So I should surround, as you know, it is something similar to 2 + 2 multiplied by 2, right? So if you surround it by parentheses like that, then it makes sense. So we have first set of conditions, for example, project equal yep or project equal to, and applied to this first filter, and description is not empty. Then it will work. And then we have only one story created. As a product owner, as a Scrum Master, or anyone who is interested in filters in JIRA, I strongly recommend to try out this JQL. That's an amazing tool. That's really cool stuff. We have found the filter that we would like to use to see stories with not empty description. We copy it, go to the backlog, for example, Then we find here manage custom filters. We put query here and we type here display stories with description. Of course, you can write whatever you want. And now we have a custom filter. We go to the project, go to the backlog, and we can use custom filters here, display stories. And we have none of them, of course, because all of them are empty. Some of the companies have the predefined filters here to show not closed stories, stories without epic, stories without some fields, and etc. Sometimes up to 20, 30, 40 filters. It is just game changer, because sometimes you want to find some specific stories related to a specific topic or mentioning a keyword. You just go to issues and then go to the JQL and you write here what you want to have. That's really cool thing. The planning. Usually we have the sprint planning and also backlog refinement. There are two meetings when we are planning our work, kind of, or we are predicting. Quite often the homework is done by product owner, which is gathering information from stakeholders, customers or users, and then providing this information kind of as an input data to a team. And then together with product owner and scrum master, we are planning what should be added to a sprint or in the backlog. It is the way how do you cut or how do you split the stories? Because imagine that we have responsible areas in servers area, in embedded area, in testing area, documentation area. So we have 4 of them. We might split our work into 4 stories. Let me create the stories and I will explain what do I mean. So imagine that we have one of the stories is implement application to collect data. Then we need to write unit tests for client and application. Then we need to document code written. And once we implemented, tested and documented, then we need to enable CI in GitHub. For example, I tried to, cut the issue horizontally, probably. So what do I mean under horizontally? We have a big epic. We have it as read data from client and we have stories. The one item is implement app to collect data. Another one, it is write unit within the same horizontal line. Then write a code element and enable CI in the GitHub. And it is kind of horizontal cut. So we have several areas to cover. They are made in parallel and it is kind of the standard way how to separate groups. But then we might have a vertical cut, kind of. And it means that developers, developer teams, or maybe a developer is responsible for the whole stack of the technology supply. And then it will be a bit different planning, because in that case, we will not have these 4 stories, but we will have something like introduce a client with, let's call it with UT and CI. For example, we might have, as said before, we might have horizontal cut when we have a separate story for application, separate story for unit testing, separate story for documentation, and enabling continuous integration. Or we might have vertical cut when we are talking about functionality and then we just say that, we want to have another client. And inside this client, we mean that we need to not only implement the code for the client, also add unit tests for it and also write documentation and then enable CI for this component. Estimation of the complexity for this story will be, of course, bigger than these 4. You can, of course, separate this story into subtasks. That's absolutely fine. It is just 2 different ways how to split the responsibility of each of the teams. Because sometimes you want to have embedded team and then you want to have cloud team and then you want to have testing team and you want to use horizontal cut when you have 4 teams working on the same stack but with different areas. Sometimes you want to have Swiss knife team and then you will have a vertical cut when you have kind of a functionality or domains to work on. And then you have, for example, 3 teams. They are working on 3 components, but everyone inside these teams knows everything about this component. So that's a vertical and horizontal cut. Of course, probably there is an official version how to call it. That's just an observation. And then controversial part. Because during the planning, there is also a personal cut. I would call it as individual planning. When you're planning the work, you are trying to separate stories from others in the competences that you are comfortable with. For an abstract example, we are working on the vertical cut. We have this introduce a client with UT and continuous integration. And I am the developer which has an experience with continuous integration. And I will say that this story with client and UT, it is big enough, and we need to split it into two parts related to the client and unit tests and for the continuous integration. So then you will forcibly take this story and we'll split it into two parts and split it issue. For example, introduce a client with UT, and then you will write here something like enable CI for introduced client, split it. From your perspective, it sounds like, why you are so picky for these stories? We created it. But that's a problem, because if we will split stories that only one person will work on them, then we are losing, in a positive meaning, diversity or cross-functionality of the team members. In the end of the day, let's call it, with some period of time, we will plan our work only in these domains or in these areas. So, for example, one colleague will plan the backlog to work only with the embedded part. One colleague will try to plan the work to work only with continuous integration part. One will work only with the documentation because it's easier, and etc. and etc. and etc. And in the end of the day, you will probably have 2, 3, 4 people who will have really deep knowledge in specific areas. And I really hope that they will not have any sick leave or any vacation periods, because without them, you're in trouble. As usual, it happens that it is summertime or something happened, the key person is leaving a project, and then everyone got crazy because no one knows their stuff as that person. I would recommend to split it into horizontal or vertical cuts or by areas, but not in personal. For example, I'm really bad in the documentation. I'm really bad on it, or in unit testing. So my goal is to include unit testing and documentation in my daily work, not to avoid it, because otherwise I will be bad on it. Or if I knew that I'm good at continuous integration, then I should sometimes intentionally avoid continuous integration work and help others to understand it, because I will gain my experience in any way. I will earn it. But in case if I will be in the vacation mode, let's say, other team members can handle it without me. And that's a goal in the end. Our goal is to either work in a group of 2 or 3 people in the specific area. For example, if you are working within embedded, really close to the hardware, then find 2 second or third person and work together closely, or try to distribute your knowledge within a team so everyone can pick up the story to work on. Try to plan your work either in horizontal cut or vertical cut, but not in personal. I'm begging you. I think that I will stop here. In this video, we went through some basics and also my whining about working with people. I think that's enough for basics of JIRA. Of course, more detailed video about specific topics can be recorded in the future. In the next video, we will actually plan the small application, modules, and etc. and the work in the backlog. I will delete all these stories and will create from scratch with proper planning, and it will be recorded, of course. Thank you so much for your time. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.